Hello students, today's lectures we will cover lesson 5 and 6 where we will be covering the market research process. So we will be looking at how we can sample data, collect them and eventually analyze our data using various charts. So let's take a look at the market research process. There are 4 steps that we'll be looking at in this market research process. Let's start off with defining the problem and the market research. Before we design our question, we have to take a look at what we want to measure. So for example, if I want to collect response based on customers' experience, I must make sure that I have a problem statement in the survey questionnaire. And in step 2, we need to develop a research plan on how can we source our data and by when we should complete. In the third step, we will look at how we can implement those research plans. And then lastly, we will learn how to interpret from the data that we collated and report the finding using various charts. And we need to understand what are the charts that can better represent our data. Next, we're going to look at the various sources of data. I'm sure you all have learned this on what is a primary data and secondary data. So when you draft a questionnaire, usually is a primary data for a primary purpose, right? But if you are gathering source that collected by others, or you're getting the data source that is published by some departments of statistics, or by some government agencies, those are considered secondary data. Or you could be looking at some publications or looking at some database that somebody already collected by other organizations. So those are making readily available data. So these are all what we call the secondary data. Primary data is you solely and purposely go and do research and got some of these informations. Next, we're going to look at the primary data collections. In this place, we're going to focus on the key decision area for developing a primary source of information. First is to look at the research approach, and then look at the contact methods, and we're going to come up with the corresponding sampling plan as well as the research instruments. We'll be looking at each of these key decision area in detail in the subsequent slides. So there are different research approach that we can consider. Here we have 3 of them. First, using the observations research. As the name has stated, basically you gather data by observing, observing people, actions, and how they behave, right? So, for example, if I'm looking at a retail industries, I can observe how people do their shopping. Do they go directly to the promotional item or do they shop around first, before they decide on the final one? The reason why marketers want to find out such information so that they know how they will want to even display or put their items at relevant places. So observer will observe how shopping do their shopping. The other one could be mainly through some survey research by using call centers. When the customer service picked up the call, there will be someone who will just even secretly listen through the call center's conversation and then look at what are the pain points the customers are having. What do they complain about? What are they not happy about? What do they inquiry about? and sometimes looking at any improvement that the customers have suggested or likes to have. So usually in survey research, we also look at questionnaire, typically use questionnaire for such research. So when you do experimental research, usually you use a group of people to determine the cause and effects of relationship. So basically you are looking at response from each individual different groups. Right, in observation research, basically what we know is gathering data by observing people actions and situation, and these data collected are usually unstructured and informal methods. It's not like the simple collecting of numbers and text, but usually is through visual observations. So it's kind of like unstructured, right? You could be secretly observing what people are doing, and noting down the pattern, noting down any particular behavior, or even noting down certain sections that they don't go, right? And why is it that they don't go? So observational research, in a way, is less intrusive, right? Basically, you're not approaching the customers and ask them for opinion. Basically, it's just observing from a distance. In survey research, is pretty straightforward. It's more collecting of the descriptive information, where you get people to write down, or even to give the answers, and these are like more qualitative kind of collections. So you collect their informations on what their likes and dislikes, their attitude, their buying behavior, or their preference, and you basically literally get them to respond and write down to you. So you tend to even ask questions, what are their pain points, their touch point, and the things that they hope to have, etc. So you collect a lot of opinion. Next, we look at the experimental research. These are where we use groups of people, to study them, and usually there is a control factors, right? What is these control factors is, for example, if you have two group, that you're going to interview, usually you will have one control group, right? And the other one is the normal group, where you don't give too much of a control inside or setting inside. Like for example, if you want to find out the effects of using sugar, on the taste of curry, right, together with the taste of curry, right? So you will have one group to taste it with sugar, the other group, they will try to taste curry without the sugar. So you have two different groups, and you find out what are the customers' response, right? So you have a group where you use to compare against. It's just like doing experiment. Next, we go on to talk about the contact methods. Here we look at how we do contact with our respondents. Is it via email, or is it the slow email where you send post letters, or is it through telephone interview, or by face-to-face kind of interview, right? So in this table, you will see they list out in terms of the flexibility, and the cost, or the strength and weaknesses of the various form of contact methods, whether it's online or face-to-face. And you will realize that the onlines are typically lower cost, more cost saving. We all know that, right? If you were to conduct a face-to-face interview, it's usually more time consuming and more expensive method, where you need to hire an interviewer, right, to go down, to interview people. So rather time consuming. Next, we look at the various sampling plan. We are looking at a segment. If you are looking at a segment of population, or right, you could be sampling a group of populations specially selected to represent, okay, the populations as a whole, right? This is where you have a big group. Okay, for example, in Singapore, we have about a population of 6 million people. It's almost impossible to interview every one of them, the 6 millions of them. So you basically sample a group of people to interview or survey, and that's a challenge, right? So how big is the group that is enough to represent the whole group? That's the challenging questions. So now if we want to take a sample of it, okay, the sample, okay, as I mentioned again, is you must pick a size that is representative enough to represent the whole group of people that could mirror what it represents, okay, for the whole group. And it's not an easy task. So how do we choose our sample? Okay, so there are actually two methods, which is the probability and the non-probability kind of sampling. So there are two different sampling where we can look at in more detail. So the $1,000,000 question is always, who is to be surveyed, right? In any of this sampling, and how many is good enough to be surveyed, right? So for example, I'm looking at 6 million people. So am I going to interview just 1,000 people, or is it enough to just interview 100? Is that enough to represent the whole response? And which of these whole populations, okay, are you going to choose? Only just the male or the female or the different race, right? So we got to have a sampling plan where we need to consider certain things, okay, before we actually conduct the survey. So here we are looking at the first of the two different type of sampling, right? The first one is the probability sampling. How do we choose our sample? Okay, so under this probability sampling, there are three ways. Okay, three ways that we can consider. One is the simple random sample. The second is the stratified random sample. The last one is through clustering. So the first simple random sample, we basically, okay, use random method. Randomly select anyone in your population, right? So that everyone has an equal chance of being selected, right? So that's random, pretty straightforward. Stratify random sample. Basically, you divide the population into mutually exclusive group, okay? And then from there, in each of these group, you do the random sample, right? Random sample. So you can look at it as, okay, yeah, you have this population that consists of some Caucasian, some different American ethnics, right? So you basically separate them, okay, into the strata, okay, which is under the Caucasian, one group of Caucasian, and one group the African American, and the Hispanic kind of American, right? So you separate them, and from there you perform randomly, okay, select any one of the people in this group, and you do the same random sampling from the second group as well as the third group. So you can see that in this stratified random sample, basically you have make sure you have a mutually exclusive group that you can separate them, okay, based on race, based on gender, or anything, right? Or even group with different opinion, right? You have to separate them first, right? In order to perform this stratified kind of random sample before you conduct the random choice, right? It could be like I say, male, female, different opinions, or even from different diploma courses, right? So you must be able to mutually separate them. Next, we look at the cluster sample. This is where population is divided also into mutually exclusive group, okay, like estate block, okay, by the different region. Okay, then the researcher will then draw samples using random sampling cluster. Okay, so to group them into different cluster, right? So population is divided and mutually exclusive. Okay, and then they will go and divide them. Okay, so uh, so in this infographics is self-explanatory, right? So you group them based on different cluster, right? Different group, and you don't base on their opinion, you don't base on their gender, but simply based on some cluster, right? Some cluster, and in this cluster, okay, they could be sharing different opinion, different schools of thought, different genders, etc. But you group them based on maybe specific area, okay? But they don't share. Unlike in the stratify, you have grouped them based on opinion, based on their certain thought, okay? But here over here, in the same cluster, you can have different opinion, right? See a bit of the difference, and within this cluster, they also perform the random kind of a sampling. Right, in the non-probability sampling, non-samplings are not as commonly used as what we have seen earlier in the probability sampling, right? It's not that popular, okay, because you don't follow any framework. And sometimes, okay, maybe people even question the accuracies of the information that is being collected from here, okay? So in the non-sampling, non-probability sampling is a bit in doubt in terms of the data that is being collected, right? So again, here we have three ways. One is through the convenience, okay, the convenience method, right? So like I say, this is like conveniently you choose anybody uh, that you like, okay, that you think can give you a good opinion, okay, in terms of your survey. So naturally, you can see that you choose your own group of people to interview, which might not be very fair or even objective, right? Because you might be choosing group of people that you think that will reply or respond to your survey, okay, more favorably, right? So that's why we are saying that it's not as popular, okay, and people do doubt, okay, the people that you survey, right? You you just choose people at your convenience, and you don't follow the simple random sampling or the stratified kind of sample. The next is the judgmental kind of a segment, right? So this is you choose people based on your judgment. As I said, you choose people that you like. Also as like the same one, convenience. Or you choose by quota sample, right? So this is also you choose people who will based on the numbers. If I ask for 50, you collect 50. So let's take a look at the details, right? So convenience sampling, as I just mentioned, if you need to reach out to 100 respondents, for example, right? Then the question is, how do you going to sample them? Right? So you might say that, okay, I just conveniently go to one MRT. Okay, since there's a lot, 100 people, I just go to the MRT, okay, where there's high traffic, and then just ask them, okay, why I go there? Because it's convenient, right? So you choose something that's of easy, okay, and fast enough to collect some of this information. Next, we look at the judgment sample. So this is you use your own judgment and select your own populations. It's not that the random way. Okay, so as I mentioned, it might not be as accurate. Okay, because you just want to choose, okay, based on own judgment. Okay, which your judgment might not be absolutely correct. So here is an example of the judgment sample. Right? So if you have a class of 20 students, right, and I need to sample 8 of them, okay, to do something, then I will just select maybe student of my liking, for example. So this is based on your judgment. So you could be biased in the sense. So that's why people say that it can be doubtful, right? In a class of 20, you choose your own 8 person, right? And you already know these students, and you could have form some stereotype, okay, with them, and you choose, okay, the students that might answer more favorable to your market survey. Next is the quota sample, right? So this quota is just simply you need to find and interview a prescribed number of people in each category, right? Using certain qualifier, you need to interview eight person. 4 of them must be male and 4 of them must be female. So there's some restrictive, or 50 Chinese male or 50 Malay males, right? So this is quota based on some numbers, prescribed numbers. So here also example, okay, to survey 40% men and 60% women. Why do we choose 40 and not 50 men or 50 women? Simply because we think that more female will be using, okay, the perfume than male, and that's why we don't choose 50 to 50, but instead more females are being interviewed. So this is quota sample, right? So of course people might doubt, hey, there are so male who actually buy perfume for the women as a gift, right? So the next step that we're going to look at is actually how to implement your research plan. Okay, your research plan should include how you collect the data, how you process it, and how you eventually analyze it. Okay, by watching closely to make sure that the plan are implemented correctly, the process, the collations of data is isolate properly, okay, with right information and the right insight. Check the data for accuracies, completeness, right, and then tabulate the results and compute the statistical measure properly. Right. Then in step 4 over here, we need to learn how to interpret and report your finding. Right. There are 3 steps here. That first you need to interpret the findings based on the information collected from the survey, then draw some conclusion out of it, and finally report to the management. So then of course, how are you going to visualize this data? Right? How am I going to use this data to report? So usually we'll try to use some uh, tabulations. Right? Here we look at the simple tabulations, just a simple tabulations to represent your report, or we could also be using cross tabulations. Right? If you look at the simple tabulation, basically we are using just one variable, right? One variable. The first one, of course, we are just looking at the educational level. But if you are using cross tabulations, you have at least two variables. Okay, two variables that you'll be correlating, right? So in this case, is the educational versus the job descriptions. So involve two variables. Next, we look at how to interpret some of these reports. How can we find the right charting, okay, the right visualizations for the data that you have collected, right? We have got the line graph, which is usually used to represent the trend, right? To see the trend, you use the line graph to usually show the historical chart. Then you use the bar chart more for comparison among different variables, right? And then you use the pie chart, okay, to show the overall chart as well as the relationship between the variables, okay, that you have. So different chart, okay, are for different purpose, and you got to use them correctly. Right? So I've come to the end of today's lessons. So in the next lesson, we'll look at more on questionnaire design, how you structure the question to collect the response. So I'll see you in next lecture. Thank you.